As my friends here take their seats, let me tell you who's here. Down, standing on your left, my right, William Large. You may remember the Florida Chamber started the Florida Justice Reform Institute several years ago. I was its first president, and we hired William Large. He's now the president of the Florida Justice Reform Institute. So all the associations in Florida that try to work together under one voice, we take our leadership from William, and then we work together on the political side to try to make sure that we unelect the right people and elect the right people, so to speak. Also, Representative Tom Leek is to William's left. Representative Leek's been a real champion in the legislature, and I appreciate you getting here and making it on time. Also, our friend Senator Wilton Simpson. Oddly enough, on the drive down last night, we saw Simpson environmental trucks as we were making our way down, so you never sleep as well. Senator Simpson's not only a champion with us on lawsuit abuse reform, he's also going to be Senate President next, and so very curious to hear what we can do to partner together with you, sir. And then Harold Kim, a dear friend of ours at the Florida Chamber. Harold Kim, think U.S. Chamber of Commerce, think the Institute for Legal Reform. Harold is somebody that's on speed dial with us, and so as we talk about how the country is talking about Florida and what else can we do to go from the bottom 5 to the top 12 states over the next 10 years. Again, if we unite the business community for good, if you all will stop writing checks to trial lawyer candidates and help unite behind the right candidates, it would be amazing what William Large and Harold and Wilton and Tom can do together with the rest of the business community. So William, I'm going to turn it over to you. Fellas, thank you for making the trip here today. This is one of the most important issues we've got to work on together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Everything the Florida Justice Reform Institute has accomplished since 2006 would not have been possible without the leadership of Mark Wilson and the Florida Chamber of Commerce. He got the Institute off the ground, and for that, we are always internally grateful for his leadership and the Chamber's leadership. Of the three folks here, I want to start off by asking some questions of all of you, and starting with Harold Kim. Harold, you run an organization called the Institute for Legal Reform that looks at all 50 states and Washington, D.C., and you are in a catbird seat in terms of what's going on nationwide. You all recently did a survey, and unfortunately, Florida ranked number 46 nationwide. What does that mean in terms of opportunities for improvement for the state of Florida in the future?
Well, William, let me start out by saying that, yeah, 46 is not a great number. At least you got better rankings than California and Illinois, so there's some solace that you can take away from that. But the ranking is really a reflection of Florida's past and not its future, because historically the state has been incredibly challenging for the business community, and it's hostile terrain for any out-of-state defendant, in-state defendant, and it's been a paradise for the plaintiff's bar. And I think that ranking is really reflected in the number 46. It's the worst ranking that the state has ever received, but I really do think that the downward spiral has stopped, especially with the opportunities moving forward with the governor, with the legislature, and with a positive Supreme Court.
Okay, thank you. President-Designate Simpson, you were an incredible leader last year on two issues. One was assignment of benefits reform, and one was the dangerous instrumentality doctrine. We'd been working on assignment of benefits reform since 2015 and hadn't been able to get that done, and you really stepped up and got that done in the Senate. How did you get that done, and what future issues do you see on the horizon in terms of the Senate that are realistic goals that we can get done in terms of civil justice reform?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and I was just very fortunate that I was going to be 20 minutes early because my calendar said to be here at about 15 after, and so I was just lucky I was early today. I walked in time to come to the stage. But yes, the AOB was very important, and it's something that we've been working on for several years, 3 or 4 years actually, maybe 5. And what happens in these arguments inside the legislative process is tipping points, right? So when I got elected, I think it was the optometrist and ophthalmologist issue. And I think AOB had run its course, and I'm glad that we got that done last year. And it's just about working with all parties to try to come to a conclusion. I think we can't get everything we want, but maybe if we can get 70 or 80% of what we want, that obviously we're in much better shape today. I think when you think about going forward, I think there's several areas that we'll work on. I know that there's a lot of talk about a mandatory BI system. There are, some workers' comp reform that's out there, accuracy and damages reform that's out there. Last week I was presented a package for nursing homes to loosen up their tort reform opportunities. So I think there's a lot of those opportunities, but I also think that as we look at normal business legislation over the next coming few years, that we should think of ways that we could build in best management practices so that we can hold harmless businesses that follow those practices, whatever the area is. We did some of that on human trafficking last year, where if you follow certain guidelines and have certain training, then the business would not be held responsible for any and all actions by their employees.
Okay, thank you very much. President-Designate Simpson got a group of stakeholders last year together to talk about best management practices, and I thought that was very effective how you set that up and how you explain what you do in your businesses, and if you do those things right, you shouldn't be held liable in a lawsuit. So thank you very much for that leadership, sir. Representative Leek, same question for you, but in the House of Representatives. You were the sponsor of the Dangerous Instrumentality Doctrine, a real leader on civil justice reform. I believe a lot of those issues wouldn't have gotten as far as they did in the House without your leadership. What were some lessons learned last year on civil justice reform in the House, and what do you see here in the future for the next session?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'd like to start by saying thank you all for having me, and I'd say I wish you chose a better picture of me, but frankly, they don't exist, so we'll go with that one. Civil justice reform, I started in 2016. I filed a bill. You kind of come in a little bit unknowing. You don't know the history of things, and I filed a bill related to stopping drive-by lawsuits as they related to the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we were able to get that through. And the reaction that I got was interesting because people were surprised that we were able to get that done. And I didn't know better, so I didn't know better to be surprised. But I also think that it's a good marker on where we've come, because last year we did a fair amount of civil justice reform, and I think in the coming years we'll do even more. So for instance, in this coming year I plan to pursue again the accuracy and damages bill, which is a bill just to make sure that juries hear truthful damages as it relates to medical costs. So I think that we've opened the door. Quite frankly, I think in 2016 we may have slid that one through, but I think last year we opened the door, and as that door has started to open, I think you will see more and more civil justice reform start to walk through that door.
Okay. I have another question for Harold. Harold, one of the things that the Institute for Legal Reform has led nationwide, and indeed helped us out a lot in Florida, is our amicus program. The Institute for Legal Reform through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has appeared in a lot of amicus briefs at the Florida Supreme Court level and our district courts of appeal. How do you make a decision about what issues to identify and make a decision to file an amicus brief, and what do you potentially see in the future in Florida?
Well, I think that there are a lot of factors that go into a decision as to whether to weigh in directly with the Florida Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court for that matter. How big of an issue is this that will fundamentally impact the trajectory of litigation on a nationwide scale? How are the merits of success? Are we talking about non-mainstream areas of the law that really do need to be addressed? And really, what's at stake? Where are the stakeholders in the state? So I think that there's a number of factors. We certainly have been active here in the state, but also with the U.S. Supreme Court as they consider major issues like class action reform and arbitration, these big ticket items.
Okay. Representative Leek, I have a follow-up question on accuracy and damages for you. The problem there is really something called letters of protection, which are a promise to pay a doctor in the future when a verdict or settlement comes in. Your bill last year was really innovative, and I appreciate your work on that. You wanted to get a database to show what costs for medical care was nationwide, but indeed in Florida for each relevant geographic zip code for each type of medical procedure. Tell us a little bit about that bill, and tell us a little bit about how far you got that, and how some of the difficulties you encountered in getting that done.
Sure. That bill actually started as an overall tort reform package with many elements, and as it worked through the process, it got skinny down to an accuracy and damages bill. We did rely on a database, and the key there is what you see in these letters of protection and what you see being presented to juries is kind of the difference between an asking price and a sales price, or a list price and a sales price. And so you have some of these folks are saying that they are the best ever in their field, and they should command just pick a number, but $1 billion for their services. And in reality, they've never been paid $1 billion for those services. They may have only been paid $100 for those services. But the problem is, what the jury is seeing is that this plaintiff is going to get stuck with $1 billion in services when everybody knows that that's not accurate and not truthful. So whether we stick with the database this year or we find another way to measure what the accuracy of those damages is, I'm not quite sure yet. That we still have to go through the process. Now, we were able to move that bill all the way through the House. We didn't ask to put it up on the House floor because it never made any traction with our friends in the Senate, but we are working together with the Senate this time to make sure that the bill that we put forth is one that we think has a fair chance to move through both houses.
Okay.
And can I just add a layered dimension to this concern about accuracy and damages? What we understand is that you've got hedge funds who know how this game is played, and they're actually investing in medical practices to get these inflated bills where they actually have the ability to invest and then take a certain return as a percentage from each and every one of these scams. And frankly, William, it is a scam, and I have no idea how this is not borderline criminal in terms of how these folks are manipulating the system in such an abusive way on a grand scale in this particular state.
Okay. My next question is for President-Designate Simpson. Senator, how difficult is it to get stakeholders together? Last year, you brought on third-party bad faith members of the insurance community, the business community, and indeed the trial bar into your office to try and fix that issue. And for those of you in the audience who don't know what that issue is about, it occurs when there's low insurance limits, clear liability, and big damages. And sometimes the plaintiff's attorney doesn't want to accept the low insurance limits for a tragic fact pattern where something is greater than the lower insurance limits. So it's very contentious. President-Designate Simpson, how did you get everybody into a room? It says a lot about you that you were able to do that and get everyone into your office to talk about that. How do you do that, and explain how contentious that issue was and how you smoothed that over at the end?
Yes, and what happens is, I think when there is someone in a leadership position, and our president last year really wanted to get some of this done, and so I was in charge with bringing those parties together, and I assured each one of them that whoever didn't participate was going to lose the battle, right? And so when you do that, they generally show up. The reality is that we have to rethink the entire way I believe that we're approaching our legislative opportunities. We have the trial bar's opportunity, right? And then we have our opportunity, the business community's opportunity. And I think if we singularly only are willing to accept our version, that's when very few things ever get finished. And so I'm hopeful that this coming year, maybe not so much this year, but the following year, we will have a lot of this teed up initially with input from both sides so that we can have a product that we can pass. Again, we're 46. It would be nice to move up to maybe 16th or something. And so, no, I think it's, and I think all parties are interested. They're more interested when they know that we have leadership. But the reality is we have elections next November. And there has to be, right now there's a 23-17 division in the Florida Senate. We need to make sure that we have at least that opportunity coming back after the next November.
Okay. I also want to ask perhaps Harold Kim and Representative Leek a question about how federal and state partners can work together and use a real issue. For example, the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is a lot of reforms trying to be done on that subject in Washington, D.C., and a lot of states are trying to work on that issue. Some people will say that that's a federal issue, but a lot of the stakeholders in the states say we need help on that. Harold, what are some things that ILR has done to lead on reforming the Americans with Disabilities Act? And Representative Leek, how did you specifically address that subject here in Florida?
Well, the reality of getting anything done in Congress is just, it's not going to happen, right? Especially in this Congress. So, yeah, there are bills floating around there. There are some hearings just to put a spotlight on some of these abuses, which frankly is not just limited to Florida. You're seeing it in New York, you're seeing it in California. And there is a federal law that is simply being abused with these drive-by types of lawsuits. I think our role has been to partner with very, very strong state chambers like the Florida Chamber to give a national perspective in terms of what we are seeing, and then also to tell the stories of the small businesses who are in the crosshairs of these lawyers who are going and extorting all of these settlements from small businesses to medium-sized businesses. And telling that story is particularly important from a national perspective because you're getting more attention well beyond any particular state. And I think that that type of dynamic is particularly important in order to convince state policymakers that, you know, this is an incredibly important issue that demands local action, but it's also happening nationally.
Okay. Representative Leek?
Yeah, thank you. I think you have to start with the premise of your question, and we can't work together for so long as Congress doesn't work. And I think right now it doesn't work because of the number of divisions that you have up there and the factions you have. So you're forced to find workarounds. And in I guess 2016 when I was elected, prior to that I had been a defense lawyer for a long time and defended a whole slew of these ADA drive-by lawsuits. And the solution for the workaround that I had was that you take a look. So the ADA lawsuits, the drive-by lawsuits, they are entirely attorney's fees driven. And the plaintiff actually cannot recover damages. The expert can get paid and the lawyer can get paid, but the plaintiff can't recover damages. And so what you saw happening was this whole cottage industry developed predominantly out of South Florida, where the plaintiff would be a plaintiff in case one, an expert in case two, and then get paid because the expert could get paid. But at the end of the day, you had to figure out how to take the economic legs out from this cottage industry. And to do so, I took a look at what the federal test was for determining attorney's fees. And we created a state program, for lack of a better term, that if you complied with the program, at the end of the day, when you got sued, the federal judge would look at that five-prong test and say that you win at each of those levels. And so if those questions are answered in the business's favor in the five-prong test, then the plaintiff can't get their attorney's fees. Now, it's a slow fix, and the problem with not being able to fix the problem at its root cause is it's going to take some time to evolve. But my working theory is that if we get enough businesses to take advantage of this program, we can take the benefit of the cottage industry away, and you will see fewer of those lawsuits being filed, while still preserving, by the way, the legitimate lawsuits for disability.
Okay. This will probably be my final question. It's for President-Designate Simpson. President-Designate Simpson, you just recently spoke to the nursing home industry about their advocacy for tort reform issues with respect to nursing homes. What is it you specifically want to hear from a business group, a stakeholder group, an industry when they come to you for reform? What type of evidence or anecdotes are you looking for to help make your decision?
Thank you, and that's a very good question. So I think what's happened is we've played defense for so long that we've forgotten there's a such thing as an offense. And when I talked to the nursing home folks, I said, again, they were telling us what they didn't want to pass and the adverse effects on their businesses that would have if some of these things, some of the bills that are passed every year would pass. And I asked them, I said, well, tell us what we should do to help you then. In other words, when you look at your set of torts, what are the top five? What would you do to improve your environment, not just keep the environment that you have? And workers' comp is a very good example of that. In the last few years, we've had some reductions in our workers' comp rates. Can you imagine, had the Supreme Court not have overturned the legislature, what it would look like instead? So is this rate better than last year's? Yes. But is it what it should be? No. And so I think what happens as businesses, I think we try not to rock the boat. We try to make sure that we keep our head down and keep out of the world of politics. But the truth of the matter is in Tallahassee, any way we turn that gauge is going to affect the business climate. So if businesses are not advocating offense on how we help them with tort and other issues, we're always looking at what is defensive. And so I think making sure that we have what are our top 3 issues, and in a perfect world, what would we do? Don't negotiate with yourselves. There are plenty of senators to do that with. Bring us the way you would want it to be, and then we'll work it out from there.
Okay. Perhaps one more question. This will be for Representative Leek. Representative Leek, business community's got a lot of issues out there. 3 of them seem to be coming to the top: accuracy and damages, third-party bad faith, attorney fee multiplier, attorney fee advertising. Those are some issues that are out there. How is it that you, as a policymaker, prioritize difficult issues and put one issue in front of the other, or how do you address that when there's multiple asks out there?
That's a great question, and on our side of the aisle, we only get 6 bills that we can file, so you have to be relatively choosy about what you file. When I look at it, what are the biggest areas of need, and then I look at, what do we have a reasonable opportunity to succeed with, and sometimes, success has to be defined as paving the road for the next year, as Senator Simpson said. Sometimes that is success. But typically, I like to know that I have a reasonable path forward to get the legislation through in a manner that it still materially corrects the issues that you've got. You don't have to win on every issue, and sometimes you give up on some issues you don't want to give up on, but have you advanced the ball? And that's how I decide what I'm going to file.
Okay. Well, folks out there, these issues are extraordinarily difficult. Tort reform is perhaps the most contentious issue at the Florida Capitol. These issues would never get across the finish line without leaders like Representative Leek and Senator Simpson. They are extraordinary for the work that they do using the bully pulpit. They're extraordinary for the work that they do behind the scenes, twisting arms, working with stakeholders. You have 2 of the finest members of the legislature up here who are truly leaders on this subject. If you don't know either gentleman, at the end of today's panel, make sure you make a note to say hello and introduce yourself to them. They are the finest examples out there in the Florida legislature, and we're very lucky to have them in the state Senate and the state House. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Harold, thank you for being here from Washington, D.C. We appreciate it.